The Widow, Episode '09. The moon, large and red like a furious eye, peered between the palm trees. Isabel, the widow, felt the cool night wind caress her face, but a much greater cold froze her heart. The scent of Ricardo, the man who was slowly melting her ice, still hung in the air, a sweet and menacing ghost. But something was wrong. A black car, silent as a shadow, stopped in front of her house. From its interior, a tall and imposing man emerged, his gaze fixed and deadly. It was her late husband's brother, and his eyes shone with a fury that promised a night of terror. What did he want? Isabel didn't know, but she sensed nothing good would come of it. The moon, red and enormous like an ember fallen from the sky, illuminated Isabel's face with a strange, almost menacing light. She felt her breath caught in her throat, a knot of fear tightening her chest. Ricardo's perfume, that intoxicating aroma of sandalwood and something indefinably mysterious, still floated in the air, a reminder of the warmth she had found in his arms, a warmth that now seemed a distant dream. But the night was far from peaceful. The shadow of the black car, parked like a metal monster waiting for its prey, weighed heavily on the house, an ominous portent. From inside the vehicle, like a ghost risen from the darkness, he emerged. Tall, imposing, with the posture of a jaguar about to attack, the man approached. It was Eduardo, Daniel's brother, her late husband. Isabel knew those dark eyes well, once filled with an almost silent sadness, now burning with a fury that left her breathless. A hatred so intense it seemed palpable, a weight pressing on her chest as if to suffocate her. He said nothing, just looked at her with that gaze that burned like embers. Isabel felt a shiver run down her spine, a shudder that went far beyond the night's chill. Eduardo had never been a man of many words, but in that look, Isabel read a whole story of repressed passion, ferocious hatred, and planned revenge. The memory of her marriage to Daniel returned with force. The memories of Eduardo's furtive encounters with her, the disguised looks of desire, the repressed passion he had always carried in secret, always hidden behind a mask of sadness and respect. Eduardo never accepted Daniel's death. For him, the loss of his brother was a blow that opened a deep wound, but Isabel's union with another man, so soon after the tragedy, seemed an unspeakable betrayal, an affront to the memory of the deceased. Ricardo, with his irresistible charm, his gentle gestures, and his passionate gaze, was the symbol of this new life that was blossoming for Isabel, a garden full of flowers in the middle of the desert of her pain. But this garden, for Eduardo, was heresy, a blasphemy against the memory of his brother. He had sworn to protect Daniel's memory, and that meant destroying everything that threatened that memory, even if it meant destroying Isabel. The silence between them was heavy, dense as a night fog. Only the sound of crickets and the whisper of the wind in the palm leaves broke the oppressive silence. Isabel felt her throat dry, her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. Every cell in her body screamed for escape, but her legs seemed rooted to the ground, petrified by fear. She knew Eduardo was capable of anything to destroy her, capable of taking away her newly discovered happiness, capable of erasing the smile that had begun to reappear on her face. He approached, his steps firm and slow, each one a hammer blow to her heart. The distance separating them diminished with each passing moment, transforming fear into terror. The shadows of the palm trees danced around them, creating a ghostly, almost supernatural atmosphere. It was as if the night itself had conspired to make the scene even more sinister, more unforgettable. Isabel could feel Eduardo's icy breath on her face, the implicit threat in his silence, a promise of suffering that froze the blood in her veins. The memory of the warmth of Ricardo's arms now seemed a distant dream, an unattainable luxury in the midst of the imminent storm. Eduardo finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse, a whisper of a snake about to strike. "You shouldn't have done this, Isabel. You shouldn't have replaced him." Daniel would never allow it. His voice was a sharp blade, cutting the night air, penetrating her heart and piercing the mask of courage she was trying to maintain. The words were a dagger, cold and implacable, penetrating deep into her soul. Isabel felt a tremor run through her whole body. She knew the night would be long and dangerous, and that the battle for her newly discovered happiness was only just beginning. The fight for her right to happiness would be fought in the darkness, with Eduardo as an implacable opponent, determined to erase any trace of joy in her life. The future was plunged into a menacing darkness. The sweet promise of a night of love with Ricardo had turned into a nightmare. Eduardo's voice, hoarse and menacing, echoed in the night, breaking the tense silence like a stretched string about to snap. Isabel felt an intense cold take hold of her body, much greater than the night wind blowing between the palm trees. Eduardo's words, laden with pain and hatred, were like poisoned arrows hitting her heart squarely. He didn't touch her, but his presence was oppressive, suffocating like a thick fog invading her lungs. She remembered the warmth in Ricardo's arms, the soft fragrance that still hung in the air, a brutal contrast to the deadly coldness emanating from Eduardo. The memory of Eduardo's secret encounters with her in the past surfaced in Isabel's mind like a ghost haunting her. Furtive glances, hesitant touches, a repressed passion that had always hovered between them like a suffocated secret. But now that secret had turned into hatred, into fury, into an uncontrollable desire to destroy everything that made her happy. The image of Daniel, her late husband, arose in her memory, the memory of a good man who had loved her deeply. But the image of Daniel mingled with Eduardo's fury in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She loved Daniel, but she also loved Ricardo, and guilt corroded her heart like a relentless acid. Eduardo took a step forward, approaching Isabel like a sinister shadow. The perfume of jasmine flowers that she so appreciated, which adorned the garden, seemed to diminish in the face of the intense smell of anger emanating from him. The night became darker, as if even the stars were afraid of the heavy, threat-laden atmosphere. Isabel tried to speak, but her voice disappeared in her throat, trapped by a knot of fear. Eduardo's eyes, full of pain and hatred, fixed on hers. She saw in him the pain of his brother's loss. But she also saw the anger at her happiness, a happiness he considered an unspeakable betrayal. He spoke of Daniel's memory, but Isabel knew that was just an excuse, a justification for his desire for possession and revenge. He was in love with her. This had always been there, latent and painful for everyone. Eduardo reached out, lightly touching Isabel's arm. The touch was cold, like ice, and for a moment Isabel felt paralyzed by fear. She could feel Eduardo's strength, the determination in his eyes. And she knew, at that moment, that she would be in danger as long as Daniel's brother was around. The memory of her embrace with Ricardo, the feeling of safety and love she had felt in his arms, now seemed a distant dream, a paradise lost forever. Eduardo began to speak of Daniel, of his love, of his life, but Isabel realized that he was lost in a narrative laden with guilt and resentment. It was a funeral lament, but also a declaration of war. He didn't just want to stop her from loving again. He wanted to destroy her, to erase her happiness and, perhaps, even her life. Isabel knew that the fight for her happiness was only just beginning and that it was a difficult battle. The battle against Forbidden's love and the pain of loss. The struggle between the past and the future. The newly discovered love for Ricardo was becoming a danger, fueled by the memory of the past and the implacable shadow of Eduardo. The red moon, as a silent witness, continued to shine in the sky, illuminating the scene of terror that unfolded on that fatal night. Isabel knew she would have to fight with all her might to survive and win the right to be happy, even if it meant facing the fury of a man consumed by hatred and Forbidden's passion. The moon, large and red like a furious eye, peered between the palm trees, a silent witness to the confrontation. Isabel felt the cool night wind caress her face, but a much greater cold froze her heart. The scent of Ricardo, the memory of his warm arms, still hung in the air, a sweet and menacing ghost, contrasting with the icy presence of Eduardo, Daniel's brother, who emerged from the shadows like a vengeful specter. His eyes, once sad, now shone with a fury that set the night ablaze. Eduardo didn't need words. His gaze, laden with hatred and repressed passion, spoke for itself. Isabel saw in him the pain of his brother's loss, the anger at her new happiness, the memory of her own furtive encounters with Eduardo, disguised glances and touches, a passion hidden under a veil of sadness and respect, a passion that he now transformed into implacable fury. The silence between them was heavy, suffocating, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the whisper of the wind in the palm leaves. Isabel felt her breath caught in her throat, her legs weak, her soul frozen with fear. Eduardo approached slowly, each step echoing in her heart like the sound of a funeral bell. He wasn't a silent killer, no. He was an executioner who liked to prolong the suffering of his victim. His voice, when it finally broke the silence, was hoarse, a snake's whisper about to strike. "You shouldn't have replaced him, Isabel. Daniel would never allow it." The words penetrated deep into her heart, sharp as knives, revealing all of Eduardo's pain, all his bitterness, his forbidden love transformed into corrosive hatred. Isabel felt tears threatening to overflow, but she held back, fighting against the fragility that invaded her. She remembered the warmth of Ricardo's arms, the promise of a happy future, but Eduardo's menacing presence made it all seem a distant dream. Eduardo continued, recounting his memories of Daniel, but Isabel perceived the mask of mourning he wore. The true intention behind his words, a possessive desire, a cruel revenge disguised as mourning. He spoke of Daniel, but his eyes were fixed on Isabel, as if possessing her with his gaze. She recognized the gleam of passion in his dark eyes, an old and sickly passion that he had never been able to control. The tension grew with each second, each word, each movement. The shadows of the palm trees seemed to conspire against Isabel, as if they were joining Eduardo in his fury. She tried to argue, to justify her happiness, but the words died in her throat. The memory of her secret encounters with Eduardo, of the moments of forbidden passion, invaded her mind, mingling with the image of Ricardo, with the promise of a new future. Eduardo reached out, a gesture of possession, an implicit warning of danger. He touched her, his hand cold as ice, while his voice continued to echo, a mantra of pain and hatred. And then, in an unexpected act, Eduardo kissed her. Not a passionate kiss, but a cold, brutal kiss, laden with despair and anger. A kiss that made it clear how much he desired her, how long he had desired her, and the pain of never having been able to have her. Isabel fought against him, against the cold and possessive kiss, against the fury that consumed him. It was a physical and emotional struggle, a despair against an intense and ancient hatred. The fight for survival and the preservation of her right to love again. In the middle of the kiss, which seemed to last an eternity, Eduardo pushed her to the ground, the force of his gesture leaving her breathless. Eduardo knelt down and whispered, "I will never let you go, Isabel, never." He held her tightly, and in a moment of struggle and despair, Isabel felt a cold knife at her throat. There was no longer any doubt. Eduardo was determined to take her with him into darkness, into death. The red moon continued to observe the scene, impassive and cold, as a silent witness to the tragedy unfolding. Isabel's fight for survival began now, in a final clash against the power of hatred and a sickly passion. Happiness with Ricardo was at risk, and Isabel's survival was in the hands of a man blinded by passion and hatred. The climax was approaching, cruel and implacable, like a nightmare turned into reality. The fight for survival and the conquest of happiness began there, in the darkness, under the furious eyes of the red moon. The moon, red and immense like an infernal flame, cast long shadows that danced around Isabel and Eduardo. The air was heavy, laden with tension, fear, hatred, and a sickly passion. Eduardo, Daniel's brother, held Isabel with brute force, his fingers like claws on her arms. His eyes, once full of silent sadness, now shone with a terrifying fury, a fury that consumed everything in its path. He kissed her, a brutal kiss, without affection, without love, only pure possessive desire and hatred. A kiss that was like a mark of possession, a declaration of war. Isabel struggled, tried to break free from Eduardo's deadly grip, but he was too strong. She felt her breath failing, her throat tightening, fear freezing her from within. The memory of Ricardo, of his warm arms and his love, invaded her like a ray of hope in the midst of the storm, but the reality was cruel and implacable. She was at the mercy of a man blinded by passion and resentment, a man who loved her sickly, but couldn't understand her love for another. Eduardo threw her to the ground violently, his fingers digging into her arms. She felt the sharp pain of the fall, but the pain was small compared to the terror she felt. The icy sensation of a knife blade at her throat paralyzed her. The cold of the blade was far more intense than the night's chill, far deeper than the cold that froze her heart. She heard Eduardo's gasping breath in her ear, felt his body trembling with the force of his fury. He was inches away from taking her life, from extinguishing the flame of hope that had been rekindled in her heart. Eduardo whispered unintelligible words in her ear, words that sounded like a curse. Isabel felt life draining away, her breathing becoming increasingly shallow. Her body trembled, not only from the cold of the knife, but also from the imminent terror. Death was a step away, closer than ever before. Memories flooded her mind, a carousel of images, the love for Daniel, the pain of loss, the furtive encounters with Eduardo, and the sweet and new love for Ricardo, a love that was about to be torn from her hands, from her soul, forever. She closed her eyes, preparing for the end, but at that moment, a loud bang cut through the night, making the earth tremble beneath their bodies. A shot rang out, silencing Eduardo's fury and breaking the tense silence of the night. Eduardo fell beside Isabel, inert. The red moon remained impassive in the sky, but the night had changed. The darkness was no longer just fear, but also suspense. Isabel didn't know who had shot, but she knew she was alive, at least for now. Lying beside Eduardo's body, she looked up, realizing she wasn't alone. A figure approached, slowly, emerging from the darkness, a long and imposing silhouette against the pale light of the moon. The figure was familiar, but its identity remained a mystery shrouded in dark mist. Was it a friend, an enemy, or Ricardo? A cruel smile played on the shadowy figure's lips. Who was it, and what did they want? And more importantly, what was the reason for that mysterious shot? The answer was submerged in the shadows, kept secret, waiting to be revealed in the next episode.